Hi, my name is Andrew McLaren, and I want to help you with this lesson plan that I made collaboratively with ChatGPT about offensive jokes and how they can contribute to discrimination and hate and what we can really do about this. So this is intended for teachers to watch so that they can do this presentation, but basically I'll have the presentation linked on Teachers Pay Teachers for sale there, so that if you're interested in just using those slides, you can. If you want to make your own, that's also fine as well from the ideas. But if you want like the quick and easy, I've got it on Teachers Pay Teachers. So we'll go over just kind of how I made this and then the actual lesson plan essentially. And I've also got the link to the conversation right here. So if you want to check that out, you can get that, and that should be in the description of the video as well. So ChatGPT, sometimes you just can't get on it. So I'm trying to link to the conversation. You may be getting that this is this message. If that's the case, I'll also put it in like a Google Drive file so everyone can view it and link that as well. Unfortunately, I can't really show you in this moment exactly what I put into ChatGPT. I might make a cut here. So I used ChatGPT to make this worksheet, but it really wasn't like it did it. It was more like a partnership between me and it, and me giving it some prompts, it giving me some response, and then me incorporating that into this presentation. It did give me the general structure of the presentation, but I think the most interesting part here is the offensive jokes that it wrote and explained, and kind of some conversation that it and I had around that and following that up. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but I just kind of want to show you how I prompted it to give me some information. And so it was able to like tell me why hate speech is harmful. It was able to tell me like, hey, online this happens as well. It can cause mental distress to the people that are being targeted, or people being aware of it, or it's going to cause some sort of distress on them. And so it's saying like, hey, like this still is important, even if it's online, which is something that a lot of students might. I basically was like devil's advocate and be like, kids gonna ask this type of questions. What does the AI say? And it gave a lot of really interesting points, including how to counter if someone is saying something offensive. And so I actually included this as a final slide in the presentation. So I was kind of like mining for little bits of information that were good. Um, I'm not sure if these studies are real, but any of the ones that were linked later, let me just double check if these ones were real, but the ones later are totally not. Like it gave me all these fake sources. So be careful. It may tell you information that's useful, but if you ask it for a source, ChatGPT, at least as of right now, can't really do that properly. So I did try and find this information online, and I was not able to find these studies that it was talking about. I even asked it to provide some links, and again, it kind of failed. It was right here. I kind of gave it the information, asked it to give me the links to these things, and it kind of is seeming like it might work on this first one, but this is actually the wrong year. It says a study in 2016, and this is linking to something from 2017. This ADL report, if you look at it, that page doesn't even work. So I don't know where it's getting the numbers exactly from, but it doesn't seem to be very good at telling you where it got those numbers from or that information from. So don't trust on getting sources from this thing, and don't give students sources from it. There was one resource that it gave, one of the links that actually did work. I think it was the hate symbols and the hate symbol database for the ADL. Actually, that link doesn't even work there. So, but I do know that the ADL does have its resources, like its database of hate symbols. It was right there. So that for some reason the link that it gave didn't even work. So I'll have to fix that in my presentation, right? But it did actually, when given a prompt about like the conversation that we had been having, I said, hey, could you make some presentation for this? And it gave me a pretty good start. And I ended up adjusting this. This was kind of like a skeleton for me that I could use. But as you can see, like it's not very good at providing actual working links and sources. Um, but it was pretty impressed. I was very impressed by this handout that it made for me. Like this blew my mind. Like I was actually just showing this to someone else, and they were very impressed by just how these jokes, it told a joke and it's like, okay, a lot of people would recognize that as a joke. Definitely offensive as well, but like it has the right format. And then in addition to that, it can tell you why you shouldn't say this. So this AI has been trained on like what it shouldn't do. And so I think it's pretty aware of what is offensive and what is not offensive. And I know students make jokes like this. I know that you may not want to show some of these jokes to students, but we're not endorsing them. We're really analyzing why these are horrible and why they make you feel so bad when some people say them. I kind of disagree though with example two here. I ended up asking it about that, and its response was intriguing. And then I basically also asked it for some more information that I could include on the slides, like, okay, yeah, these jokes are bad, but why are they bad? So that I could have something to refer to in my presentation to talk to students about why, because I know they're going to ask about that, right? All of these links don't work. I kept on being like, hey, can you give me some sources for this information? And I thought it was working for a little bit. And so I asked if these were trustworthy. It told me they were trustworthy. It can tell you why something should be trustworthy, but it's not actually a trustworthy source. So just be careful. And then here we got to asking about that joke that I was like, I kind of disagree with you about why that was offensive. I mean, I kind of get what it was saying. But then I clarified why I thought it was maybe offensive, and it summarized that really nicely. And then I really like this, something that seems innocuous, seems harmless, can really have a big impact. And so it's really important to be aware of those impacts these jokes can have. I think that's a huge thing that I would want to emphasize with students, where it's like, yeah, you're fine, your friend's fine, but the kid sitting 3 rows behind you may be really hurt by what they just heard. So, or maybe they're slightly hurt, but they're hearing things like that constantly, and it's an attack against them. So we got to be aware of that, right? And so this ChatGPT knows this. I think that we can show our students through this logic that it's laying out why they should or should not be doing this stuff, right? And then more links that don't work. And I was trying to prompt it to see if it could give me something eventually that was real, and then just telling it that the link doesn't work, and it just couldn't do it. And then I actually, interestingly enough, I asked it, hey, could you give me a title? Because I want a title for this YouTube video. And it's really good at making like titles and descriptions, that type of stuff. And then just kind of clarifying, capitalizing, because I'm a science major, not language arts, you know? Um, and then asking what colors, if I want to use some colors. This was really cool. How it was like green for suggested action, orange for urgency or importance. It's like, wow, like that's pretty advanced. And then it told me to get rid of all the words, which you're probably like strongly agreeing with. You should have seen it before I added in some visuals. And yeah, ChatGPT, I really like collaborating with you. Good collaborator. So if you're trying to use these slides with students, I would maybe delete slides 2 and 3, maybe just slides 2 and just use it as is. I tried to write these so you could just use these. So you've got your objectives showing the students the 2 main goals. Basically, I added a second one here from what ChatGPT had because I want students actually saying something when they see this. And so there's quite a few steps here where we're introducing the topic, discussing the general idea of offensive jokes, and then going into a couple examples of offensive jokes and talking about why those would be offensive, which, you know, could be kind of like the kids are going to say, oh, like trigger warning. It could be kind of something that could make somebody get offended. We're not supporting these jokes by sharing them. We're actually criticizing them and trying to deconstruct them to help students understand why these are not funny. Some students might laugh at the jokes, so be prepared for that and know what you're gonna say. Be like, I disagree. I don't think that's funny, and let's talk about why. I think that this causes more harm. I don't think this is harmless. Let's talk about why. That kind of stuff. And so basically, you're going to have then students do some research where they learn about some resources about hate speech and jokes, and a presentation where you just give them some information about the effects so that you can have that conversation about these effects. I thought that would be good to have a little bit guided and a little bit of research time to have them just learn some more. And then there's a little bit of a conclusion where we're trying to help them know what to do in these situations where you see this stuff. So just a little overview. We've got our slides where we've got our introduction. Then they discuss this, just to get us warmed up. Then we dive into the actual topic of these offensive jokes and look at their impacts. And they're all a little bit different. There's some here that are offensive to people who are refugees, some people who are being looked at as kind of like dumb for being a certain group, or people laughing about the suffering of other people. It's a pretty common issue with students where they're laughing at the suffering of another person, and I want them to understand why that in of itself contributes to discrimination. And I kind of disagreed with ChatGPT about number two. So this is kind of an interesting thing where I think students will find this interesting, right? It kind of understands why things might be offensive, but kind of missed the mark here. But it still, this joke did kind of seem offensive to me still. So I think that that's pretty cool how that kind of shows that off. But then there's this presentation where you can show them like, hey, like when you make these jokes, this is the impact. Like it makes people normalize hateful beliefs when you make these types of jokes, and reinforces behaviors that are harmful towards these groups. So it makes us more likely to mistreat these groups when we make jokes about them. You may think that you're immune to that, but someone in your friend group may not be. And you can't just make that assumption. As a group, we know that this does affect people significantly. And there's psychological harm on the person who's being attacked, and that they feel excluded. And that has a real mental toll on these people, besides the actual physical denial of rights and services that happen because of discrimination, right? So if students push back on this, tell them like this has been studied. There's tons of studies that show this. This isn't just my opinion. There is a problem with like rising hate and discrimination that rises from that hate. And so we need to make sure that we're aware of that, but we're also not like depicting the world as like falling apart and everyone like hating each other, because that's not necessarily true. It's just that there's some hate that's getting prevalent, and with that prevalence of that hate, those groups are getting discriminated against. So there's a lot of good studies here that show that we need to do something basically because this causes real harm, and we should be minimizing harm. But then it's like, what do you do, right? So I would give them a presentation where I'm like, okay, this does do harm. Let's have a conversation. If you want to push back, talk to me about this a little bit. Because you know a lot of these kids really want to on this topic, especially. We're like, you can't tell me what to say. It's right. They're right. We can't make it so that there's a censure of speech, but I want them to understand kind of why that's the case. So I'm not advocating for saying like making this hate speech illegal or whatever, but it's good to look at like hate crime stats so we understand who's really being attacked, right? So if you're making jokes about the groups that are really being attacked, you're contributing to that. So I want students to understand that. Um, and then I wanted them to also see that Americans are less tolerant of forms of hate speech now. They're getting, in general, they're more tolerant across the board, but they don't like this term hate speech, and when people do that more and more. So that's something to be aware of. But also, if you look at like our American civil liberties, they are very much supportive of offensive jokes and people's right to make those jokes, even though they have negative impacts that we should be addressing and trying to minimize that speech without criminalizing it, because that can be dangerous for society when we have a government determining what is hate speech and not hate speech. Some governments will use that to just limit journalists' ability to say things. So there is definitely some concern about that happening. That happens in a lot of places around the world. You can see that happening. There's also some clarity around like hate crime versus hate speech. If you're threatening someone, that gets into that crime territory. And so the Southern Poverty Law Center has like a good little thing about that. And then I also wanted to have students just understand what are symbols of hate. And this is gonna, I know there's gonna be some kids, if they see Pepe on here and hate speech, they're going to like start frothing and getting really mad because this symbol they think is totally innocent, But as you can see just from what I've shown you there, it is used in incredibly offensive ways, and it's a way to like show someone that you're also kind of in on the joke when you make these Pepe jokes. And it does contribute to a lot of issues that ADL and a lot of groups have written about why, but it is totally tied to those groups at this point. So there's a lot of good things in here. And then the conclusion, to wrap it all up, is basically okay, when you see this, explain harm, highlight the differences between humor and then how some humor can be used with hate, and that's different and not funny, but dangerous. And then encouraging empathy and offering alternatives, like using their humor to criticize systems that are bad for minorities or to celebrate diversity and promote inclusion, because jokes don't have to be offensive. Um, so just kind of giving them a little game plan on when you see someone saying these things, you gotta explain like I did with studies, and then you gotta highlight how when some of these things have hate in them, they can contribute to this discrimination. So that's a big piece that I personally would want to hit with the students. So there's a various reasoning for like these things, kind of like me giving it to the students. I want them to have some time talking amongst themselves about what is offensive and what is not. I do want to come together about it, and then I want to give them a little game plan about why, when you're thinking about this stuff, like how to think about it. And it's like, okay, this is having these issues. Teachers told me there's these issues, but I kind of want to know the other side of this as well. So like, why is it important to have like free speech and kind of like the definition of this stuff with some readings and exploration, and then coming together to be like, okay, when you see this stuff, what do you do? When you see other people doing this, what do you do? Right? Thank you for McLearning with me. Before you go, please check out the following services that I offer with my business. So if you click the link in my videos, this goes to my website. I might be changing it from Podia because I'm no longer doing the interactive videos for sale. I might put those up for free. But most of my other services are linked here. So you can see that I've got like a Teachers Pay Teachers and a Wisant. The Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of my assessments that I have for like the NGSS, as well as lessons that I made when I was actually a teacher in the classroom. So I've got quite a few things like CERs and other things on there. If you want to get one-on-one live support from me, either like with science or like working on like teaching support lessons and that kind of stuff, you can sign up through Wisant. I have a link to there where you can contact me there, and we can schedule hourly appointments. I've got a few other things on here like a Facebook page and our social media. And if you're interested in getting professional development with me for like a team of teachers, a whole page with information on that. So yeah, feel free to check that out. Thank you.